All right. Did you want me to go on to the presentation, Mandy?
Yeah, sorry, stuck on mute there.
Yeah, sorry.
I do want you to go into the presentation. I had asked Corey to talk about the results of looking at all the acoustic data that's been recorded across the province. So last month we had Kirk talking about similar acoustic recordings that were made in 4 BC parks in the southern part of the province and what they found. And yeah, I just think it'd be great to expand on that with what's going on everywhere else. So thanks for coming, Corey, and doing this.
Yeah, well, no problem. I will put in a slight caveat, and that is that this presentation, I mean, it goes through there's one graph I'll show of the activity levels, but there's just so many sites, it's almost impossible to really convey that in this type of presentation. There's we've got 100, so there's just about 200 sites, acoustic sites, that we've got surface monitors at, and then there's another 200 sites that we have underground monitors. We have about 400 acoustic sites that have been recording, each one recorded for a full winter. In some cases they record for a full year, and a few of the sites we've actually been recording at for about 5 to 8 years. So you can imagine we are just wallowing in acoustic data. And so thanks to Emily DeFreitas, she's been helping us, and Jason Ray, really kind of diving down into those. And we've got 127 sites fully analyzed, and the other ones are all in sort of partial, actually no, sorry, more than that. We've got 200, all the back caver ones, the underground ones are all done. So what I'll do today is, I think what I kind of would be kind of more informative is to give you an overview of where those acoustics data sit, what patterns we see, and couched in with the whole sort of scene of winter ecology in BC. And so this will be a little bit of a recap, but it also, what it does, it includes some of the data that I pieced together for the BC Bat book. By the way, that BC Bat 2nd edition handbook, Jared, myself, Mark Brigham, and Dave McGorson finished that up earlier in last month, and we submitted that. So that will be hopefully published by this time next year. And some of that data then is in this presentation as well. So it's a little bit of a stimulus for conversation. And also, I was happy that you asked me to do this, Mandy, just because this is actually good timing with the summer, maybe not having a lot of field work. I am looking at pooling together all of our winter data then and putting it out into a manuscript. So this is kind of a chance, I think, to sort of give the bigger picture of what's happening with bats in BC. And I know that there's other people out there that might have some monitoring data or some observations that might be interesting to pool into this as well. So, okay. Now, are you guys seeing my screen? And
yeah, I can see your screen.
Does it look proper, or is there a whole bunch of stuff along the top?
That looks great.
Oh, it looks great? Okay, it's just on my end then. It's got a whole bunch of stuff. Okay. All right, so I'll just go through this PowerPoint presentation and we'll just see how much time. I'm going to try to plow through it a little bit fast to make sure that we can have some discussion. But, okay, why is it not changing? I'm going to have to restart the play. Oh, there we go. Okay, now it's going to advance. All right, so basically, there have been 3 major winter projects that we've been working on for a while. Those, you guys know, Bat Caver. We've got that one basically wrapping up now in BC with just a few sites, specifically up in Eugene and Bryan's area up in the northeast BC, where we'll continue to look underground for bats. But in a lot of the areas we're sort of pulling out now, having sort of kind of figured out what was going on. And I'll give you an update on that in a second. And the winter bat ecology, this is what Mandy was referring to, the surface monitoring and kind of looking at where bats are active, what species, potential hibernation areas then, and some capture and tracking. And then the white-nosed survivorship models, how fast and what conditions do bats hibernate. This is one that I haven't really been able to present on quite yet because the models weren't done, but I was just on a call a few days ago, and they actually have sort of finished them up now, and we're looking at starting to present on that. So maybe that'll be another presentation I'll do at some point. I can just give you a highlight of what we've got with that. It's actually some good news for several of the species in the West. So who does this work? Obviously, I just want to make sure I put my name down on this presentation. It is a lot of stuff that I've done since 2008, but there's a lot of other people, cavers and mine enthusiasts and volunteers, and the survivorship modeling team is largely out of New Zealand and the US, and actually out of Western University as well in Ontario. Okay, so this is what I'm sort of alluding to is when we're talking about winter ecology, winter acoustics, I know it's being done by other people, and if there's some interesting finds that you have that you would like to include in the bigger picture, you know, if you let me know. Some people have already done that and they got included in the BC Bat book. It's not too late to add in a few of those small changes if you did have something though that would be noteworthy to put in there, and otherwise we'll look at publishing just a bigger paper on it. So this is what I'd mentioned. We have about 400 acoustic sites across the province. About half of those are underground, half were above. Most of the winter capture we did was down in the West Kootenay, the Okanagan, and the Boundary areas. Bat caver, I won't mention too much about it, other than the fact that you could go to the website and check it out, batcaver.org. And we have a lot of helpers, and that work is still continuing up in the Northeast. Generally, our main conclusion is that bats don't seem to exist in large numbers underground in BC. And interesting, and this is something that a lot of people find a little bit fascinating, is that we don't actually have any genetically, acoustically, or morphologically confirmed hibernacula for our two building roosting species, little brown and the Yuma. So we've got a few building roosts that they stay in the winter, but in the winter. But in the winter, as far as caves, mines, anything like that, there's a few like sort of unconfirmed older records, one from the 1950s from Williams Lake, but nothing really concrete, and certainly nothing recent. And that's kind of interesting. Even after all this work with bat caver, that's where we sit. We are continuing to look in the Northeast, so it seems like there's really good potential to find them up there. We just have to get access into these underground sites now. Okay, and then we do have three, and I think most of you know it, three significant hibernacula in BC, but they are all in mines. Two of them in the West Kootenay, and one of them is in the Greenwood area, and those are the species associated. So in general, I drew a line kind of through this sort of big gap where we didn't have a lot of sampling, and sort of found that anything sort of south of that has a pretty good chance of having bats detected in the winter. Both underground and above ground, but certainly above ground. The underground ones are a little bit of a kind of a shot in the dark, if you will, because especially some of these big caves and big mines, where do you put the detector? And these are roost loggers, and they don't have a big range on purpose. But if you put them in the wrong place, you might not record bats, even if there's a few that happen to use a part of the cave. But nothing really big in terms of numbers of bats, except in a few of these mines anyhow. And most of the surface sites then do detect bats in the winter. So that suggests a lot of rock crevice use and possibly tree use as well in the winter. Okay, so here's our list of species then that we have been acoustically detecting, and in some cases capturing as well. So we've got western small-footed, long-eared Californias, big browns, silver-haired, Townsend's Yuma myotis, and something 40K, which is either a little brown or a long-legged. Now those are acoustics, and acoustically also detected by like Kirk mentioned in his last presentation, of course, and Tanya a few years ago. We've got winter detections now of fringed and pallid, so we know that they overwinter in the province as well. Oh, and I just saw Tanya, so what about root wads? So yes, exactly, thank you, Tanya, because root wads, based on what Karen Blavis found, I think Karen's on the phone even, she, up in Alaska, of course, they're tracking them to not just kind of a rock crevice talus type roosts, but they're actually finding them in the root wads in between the roots of the trees. And of course, we have no shortage of that sort of habitat here, and trying to nail down if that's being used and where. I mean, these are the sorts of things that we obviously need to start turning our attention to as well in BC. Okay, so this is, I just took a subsample. Like I said, I couldn't show you all 127 sites, and we don't really have a good way of pooling those yet. We will, but this is really hot off the press, like last week, data brought in by Emily, and I appreciate her effort to get a lot of this to me. I can't show it all right now, but stay tuned. We will be going through this in a very rigorous way to group it and make it presentable. But you can see what we're dealing with, the variation here. Our range is from 1 to over 3,000 passes per winter at some of these sites. So this is passes per winter. And what that suggests is, you know, I think in many cases, the closer you are to good hibernation habitat, probably the more passes you're picking up. And of course, that also depends on the number of bats there and the number of species and so on. So we're going to be piecing out this data a lot more as we go along and looking for patterns and trends. And one thing I want to do is look at latitude and longitude and see if we can kind of pull out some of the species patterns as well. So lots to come yet. And what we know about confirmed hibernacula, again, this is just a bit of a summary, but hopefully this is useful information just to recap where we actually know that bats have been hibernating confirmed through visual captures. And if I am missing anything, please let me know. But basically, we've got western small-footeds in mines. We've got evotus in several different structures now. California myotis in several structures, big brown, silver-haired, Townsend's, the Yuma, like I said, even though we detect them on the landscape flying around, the only hibernacula we've actually recorded them coming out of or being in is buildings, and the long-legged as well. So, okay, oh, Karen, okay, so I got your chat. Bat Amp, yes, so Karen is mentioning Bat Amp. That is a place to be able to put all of your acoustics data. And yes, Karen, these data sets are going to end up there very soon, even though it's like a decade late. But yes, they are going there. And in fact, we've got a setup where I think we're going to enter them through any bot, and then they just link into BatAmp. Yay, yes. Okay, so just really quickly, some noteworthy things. Again, I'm just stabbing at a few things that kind of are interesting that you might want to know, or maybe you already heard, but these are the things that are sort of interesting. Farther north, northern records, Atlin was sort of our most northern records, last bat and first bat. So not terribly different than what you see in other parts of the province, but of course Atlin, you know, it is pretty far to the west. But on the other hand, one thing we are learning is that even if you're further north, it doesn't mean your winter is that much longer than the bats in the south. And fall, little brown records. So we're trying to figure out where those little browns are hibernating, and our latest records going further north into areas that could have crevices and bats roosting in them is Haida Gwaii, and Brian found some recordings at a rock bluff kind of up in that northeast BC, Dawson Creek area. So those are late, which means should we kind of be looking for some of these late records to start snooping around a little bit more to figure out where those bats are hibernating, because presumably they're pretty close to those spots. And when I say close, just so you know, like these are the distances I've tracked bats, radio tagged bats in the winter. So in Alberta, the furthest out was 5 kilometers. So a female big brown from where she was captured to where she went back into an erosion tube was 5 kilometers. But in BC, the longest distance flight that I've seen is actually from Silverheads, and that's still only half a kilometer. So bats are probably sticking pretty close in the winter. So if we can find them late in the fall or even in the winter, then we probably have a good chance at finding their hibernacula. Okay, and noteworthy, this is just sort of for fun, but yeah, we do get mixed clusters. This is silver-haired and California myotis. And we get some of these, this is just an interesting observation where silver-haired did actually get frozen inside a crevice that it couldn't get out of because it got trapped with the ice. They roost in pretty shallow spots, actually, these silverheads. And seems like silverhairs are probably in many more places hibernating in the winter in this province than we think. And that's something, especially further north, we would like to start looking at a little bit more. And Yuma, so I said I didn't know we didn't find any real hibernacula, but in fact, this one was early November. A bat tracked 6,000 feet. We actually had to access it with a helicopter, but we actually did find it underneath this boulder. We found the transmitter, at least. We don't know if the bat spent the whole winter there. But these are the sort of snippets of what we're getting, and is it real? Are these bats, hibernating, things like this Yuma myotis? We don't exactly know yet. Here's some other detector data then that we had a detector that didn't work for a little while in the summer, but this detector is sitting at the highest pass in the province, Thelma Crescent, 1,740 meters. And what we do see towards the end of the summer then in August is just this massive spike of bats going up and over this pass. And that might also help us with figuring out some of these things like bats that migrate down river valleys versus up and over mountains. So there's a lot of text here, I apologize. This has been taped, so you guys can read this at your leisure later when the link goes out. But just for an interest's sake, way up top here at the 1,740 meter pass, we got a lot of these species moving over the mountain. But when you looked at the exact same time when we had detectors down in the Creston Valley, way down on one side of this pass, then there were a big spike of fringed myotis moving through there, and we never detected any fringe up on the mountain. So again, I think it's fairly kind of maybe stepping at least towards a conclusion that we've got fringed myotis moving kind of up and down the valleys, but not necessarily going up and over these high elevation passes like some of these other species seem to be doing. Okay, just looking at the time, and I'll try to whip through the rest of this so we can have some discussions. But just so you know, yes, guano is produced midwinter. Bats fly around, they poop. But what that poop contains are insects that were eaten in the fall, and that we still have no evidence of actual consumption of food by bats in the winter. Having said that, there are some observations on the coast, and especially Doug Brills has some observations of bats that have been feeding midwinter and from feeding buzzes. So that's a little bit of a mixed bag. Okay, this one I'm going to whip through fast, but it's for you guys, acoustic geeks out there. We are looking for this type of call. This is produced by silverhairs that are hibernating in the mines that we have in the Kootenays. And Karen Blada sent us a few from Alaska now too. And we're trying to figure out, when these recordings are made, are these associated with mating? Because we certainly record a lot in the winter. Oh, good, Tanya's got that call in spades. Yay. So what I need is kind of just a sense of the dates. So I'm just going to show you a bunch of these. Okay, these are all silver-haired, what we're calling silver-haired songs. And they're repetitive patterns. They can be a little bit cutesy, but they all have this sort of very patterned shape and very similar. I think a few of those might even repeats. But just for you full spectrum people, here's what they look like in full spectrum as well. And if you see any of those, let us know if you wouldn't mind, just because what we've got so far is basically we've recorded all months except between June 16th and August 28th. So we're on the lookout for those. Okay, now the last thing I wanted to talk about then is just our white-nose survivorship models. What we're trying to determine, and we're really just wrapping up now, is we were looking at the fat that bats have going into hibernation. We measured their metabolic rates, looked at their arousal rates using modified eye buttons and temperature sensitive transmitters, and then we were looking at the hibernacula conditions to figure out, first of all, how fast the bats would go through their fat, but then also considering how fast the fungus would grow. Oh, that sort of got shifted, but anyhow, you can see here, these are my capture data and a little bit of some others that we've gathered for the book. And these are the only species that we could do this with, where we had fall and spring weights. But you can see the huge variation in how much fat these bats put on, with Yuma myotis actually putting on the least amount of the species that we were able to look at. So that doesn't bode well for Yuma having a nice fat supply that they could make it through winter with white nose. But that's just looking at fat. And of course, we looked at a lot of other things. And how much fat do they truly need? What we even found in the Little Browns in Catamount Cave over in Alberta, for example, use very little fat to hibernate their 6.5 months, way less fat than is being used in eastern populations of Little Browns overwintering there. And that's good news for them as well. And what we are leaning towards is a fairly good news story then for Little Browns in the West in terms of surviving white nose, especially the further you go north. And this is just a snippet of some of the preliminary models that we produced. And you can just see that this dark purple here, okay, the darker the purple, the more fat will be remaining at the end of winter, hibernation. So we've got the left one is bats that are just hibernating without the white nose infection. On the right, it's bats hibernating with the white nose infection. And so there'll be less fat remaining at the end of winter if they've got the infection, and that's expected. The top one here, A, is showing you 4 degrees and 98% relative humidity, if that's what they were roosting at, versus 2 degrees, 100% relative humidity. And that's the range as you go from, because our samples really that we base this model on went from Montana all the way up to just into the Northwest Territories. And that was a lot of work done by Corey Olson and team over in Alberta, getting those for us, and University of Winnipeg, Yvonne Dezal. And so after everything kind of got modeled, this has been extrapolated to the rest of the continent actually, but I'm not showing you that here. Those are some new graphs that or new plots I saw last week, but that's coming. And ultimately what it means is you can see right here, if they're using 2 degrees, which the Northwest Territories bats are in the cave, then they're actually going to have some remaining fat left, i.e. they're not going to die with white nose infection based on our models. And so these northern areas could be very important for refugia. Okay, and the last thing then is how do we move forward? What data do we need to collect? I mean, obviously we got a mound of data, and we're now just basically pulling it all together as a big winter ecology look at bats in British Columbia, and we had to use a lot of tools to get it. I mean, acoustics are a great tool, but we've also used a lot of other things to kind of piece this all together. But moving forward, obviously we're all getting more and more armed with acoustics. So getting bat detectors out in the winter, we're going to kind of maybe start calling it something like beyond NA bat. So yeah, NA bat monitoring is great in the June period. We do need that. But if there was interest and funding, and these detectors are already there, maybe we could start putting those detectors out in the fall and learning about migration routes, and winter learning about where bats are hibernating, and late into the fall could be a sign of a hibernaculum. So for example, recently Roy Ria at UMBC reported some day flying bats, 3 Little Browns, clearly in an area that had a lot of rock crevices. Late, it was on it was on Halloween Day actually. And that was north of Prince George. So these are the sorts of things that also might help us cue in. So even if you don't have a detector, if community bat people we get the outreach going to the public to know that any day flying bats in the fall would be really important. Because here's a lesson I learned from it. My acoustic detectors start basically at sunset, but in the fall, sunset is pretty cold. And some of these bats in the fall are coming out in the daytime, mid-afternoon, or even earlier to feed on the insects, because it's too cold to do that later in the dark. So these are some of the things that might help us in our northern areas. In the southern areas, it won't necessarily help us, because what I found in the southern areas, bats still just follow this, let's emerge at proper emergence time, and this is the kind of pattern you get. So most of the activity does actually happen typically after dark in southern BC, but as you go further north, I think we've got some more day flying bat activity indicating where bats are hibernating. Okay, so bat detectors, yeah, if we could get those out, that would be great into the off season and start to learn more about migrations and looking for hibernacula. And we really, I know this seems kind of crazy, and we're going to have to figure out a strategy to do this, but we really do need to try to get some swabs from bats in these winter caves. We know there's not big groups of them, it seems, But just to be able to even point to a cave and say, we know for sure that little brown myotis or septentrionalis roost here, that would give us some critical habitat, some confirmed critical habitat in this province, which we actually don't have yet. And more data on hibernation conditions. Obviously, we need that for more species, and especially because we do seem to have time before white nose arrives. We still have time to be collecting these and preparing to figure out what species, if any, are going to be hit really hard by the fungus. And that includes knowing how much fat they go into hibernation with and so on. So the winter data roundup. And with that, I'll end and just let you know that thanks to Dana Bluen on my bat team, she has put together a new website for WCS Canada. So if you have some time over a sandwich, want to check that out, wcsbats.ca. And that's where we've now listed all of our partners and funders and so on as well, and all our projects. And that's the end.
Thanks, Corey. That's awesome. It's a ton of information. And if you send me the link after, I'll send it out with the minutes to everybody, because I know I'd like to look at some of that more slowly. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's such a multi-part project. Yeah. Okay. Questions for Corey? Tanya has typed you one there. Would August 1st be ideal to catch our migratory bats?
Yes. Yeah, that would probably be good. We don't have the super early migrations, I don't think, like they do in Alberta. I mean, hories are starting to migrate by mid-July over in Alberta, but we've been definitely seeing hoary bat activity into September, mid to late September, even still in that Castlegar area, I know for sure. So I think, yeah, starting in August 1st would capture probably, we don't know enough about the reds, but that would probably be good for reds too. Any other questions? Okay, so yeah, and I see the songs. Yeah, songs, if anyone's got song data. Oh, another one. Oh, activity recorded later. So I'm just reading Felix's text. Is the winter activity recorded early in the winter, later, or throughout the winter season? Oh, it so varies. Yeah, and that's why I want to sort of look at latitude, because a lot of the winter activity, it kind of, depending on the area you're in, it can just go all winter, like especially on the coast, in the West Kootenay in particular, it just goes all winter at some of these sites. Oddly enough, some of the really bad snowstorm days where there's a lot of snowfall, and it being days that we get a lot of bats flying. But it kind of, as long as it's the first big snowfall, as long as it's been sort of dry for a long time and all of a sudden there's a snowfall, they will be out flying. And we've sort of got a little bit of a jump on how to predict that in our area, but I think it's going to be very different everywhere. So it really, and that's why it's so hard to figure this out, because it seems like the activity patterns differ all across the province, and I think it's largely due with like moon phase in relation to forest cover and cloud cover and availability of water and so on. And okay, John just sent a text or a chat. We now have 2 reports from residents of silver-haired bats roosting in local wood piles over the Coquitlam area. Yeah, and this is something, so silver-haired bats are just, they love the wood piles. So here in the Kootenays, they spend a good chunk of time in wood piles and rock crevices and mines and trees. And definitely through the NA Bat program, I've been really surprised to find that silverhairs are one of our more common species. Just looking at the relativeness of the different species and the bat activity in the NA Bat program, many of the grid cells, silverhairs, are some of our most common species. And it seems like they're year-round residents in a lot of these places. So that's really interesting. I think we're going to find out a lot more about silverhairs moving forward now as we start to pull all these observations together. So I hear a lot of beeps, and yeah, it is straight up the hour. So thank you. I can continue to address any little chat questions if there are any, but I think we're pretty much wrapped up here.
Okay, thanks, Corey, and thanks, everyone. I've got to run as well. That was awesome.
Okay.
I appreciate the presentation. But yeah, I'll
Okay.
just leave and you guys can stay if you like.
Yeah. Okay. I'll hang on for a couple of minutes and then I'll send that link around once it's converted.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. All right. Thanks. Bye.